General Manager of Green Building. I am Peksha Virajini, the General Manager of Green Building Council of Sri Lanka, and I would like to take the next 12 minutes of your time to elaborate on the Green Building Council of Sri Lanka and also the pathway towards Green SL accreditation. I would like to start this conversation from this image. That is the planet Earth, that the home that we are living. That was taken by the upload 15 years ago. When we stand up and look up, we can see a limitless sky, right? But actually, it is not limitless. It's just a thin layer like this. That is what we call the atmosphere, which affects on each and every action occurs on Earth. It's because of this greenhouse effect that our planet has become a live one, since it absorbs heat from the sun and reflects majority to the space while keeping some heat inside, which are absorbed by the greenhouse gases. But unfortunately, due to the continuous greenhouse gas emissions after industrial revolution, the Earth or the atmosphere couldn't take it all. So that is why the global issue called climate change has occurred. As Sir David Attenborough, the famous environmentalist, introduced, the climate change is a man-made disaster on a global scale. So unfortunately, it is the last decade that we can do something about this. So we have lost control of climate due to this issue and compared to the pre-industrial levels. And we are experiencing these types of effects of climate change. As a Green Building Council, we are more focused on the impact of built environment. Since we spend 90% of our time indoors, buildings are a big part of this problem, since it contributes nearly 40% of the greenhouse gas emissions, and it contributes 12% of the water use, 65% of the waste output, and 71% of the electricity consumption. So as the Sri Lanka's leading authority on implementing green concepts and green building practices, we have gained the membership of the World Green Building Council as well, which is the most influential local, regional, global action network leading the sustainable transformation of the built environment. And with to lead and drive this transformative change, we are working on the impact areas of climate action, health, equity and resilience, resources and circularity. And this global network consists of over 44,000 members in 77 countries, and we are one country. Now we have over 13 years of experience in the green building sector under this eminent leadership. And our vision is to transform the construction industry in Sri Lanka with green building practices, taking care of the 3 pillars of sustainability: environment, society, and economy. And our mission also has aligned with the vision to make this change, driving the adoption of green building practices through market-based solution, helping to forge new partnership with between governments, industries, and other stakeholders. So we have now trained over 1,800 green professionals, and we have rated over 7 million square feet of green built area, and we have rated 49 green building products. So as a responsible organization, these are some of the areas that we cover. We do green building certification, we certify green building products, we conduct education and training program where we train our professionals to conduct these certification studies. And we conduct research and development activities, volunteering activities, then we conduct public awareness sessions, in-house training programs, and the sustainable related initiatives are recognized at the end of each year through annual Green Building Award ceremony. But today, since we are in one of the education program, I would like to give more focus on the education and training. As the future, as he says, the future of humanity, and indeed all life on earth now depends on us. So the nations across the globe have made ambitious commitments to reach these climate change targets. But the big question is, how can our economies grow more thoughtfully, more climate friendly, while also providing new opportunities for people? But the answer is by making the transition to a green economy. So why not start today by thinking about the green skills that you could acquire in your existing or maybe your new role to start making this impact? Because after all, we are tied to by a common objective to leave this earth better than we found it. So the term that I used, green skills, green skills are those that enable the environmental sustainability and economic activities. Maybe the skills that contribute to reduce pollution or maybe conserving natural resources. So according to the LinkedIn data, the world has not enough green talent or skills or jobs to transition fully to a green world yet. So advocacy and the adoption are critical. But not all jobs of the future may need to be 100% green, but they should skew as much as possible in that direction. There are green skills that can be adopted to make an existing jobs also more sustainable. For example, it could be a fashion manufacturer, sourcing more eco-friendly materials. It could be a fleet manager, leveraging hybrid or fully electric vehicles, or maybe a sales representative, creatively reducing their travel footprint by leveraging remote selling. So there are green skills that can be learned to help workers to pursue a new role in emerging sectors. Maybe the sectors like green energy, sustainability, and environmental remediation. But these may involve offline and online learning to upskill. So it's obvious that the green skilled workers were hired at a faster rate than non-green workers over the past 5 years. In that time, I think that's the like 9.6 to 13.3 increment, which shows a 8% of annual increment within past 5 years. So the trend is there for green jobs. And the jobs like sustainability managers, solar consultant, wind turbine technicians, ecologists, those are the roles that barely existed a decade ago. But now, by today, they are the 5 fastest growing green jobs globally. So, but unfortunately, the volume of workers moving into the green and green in jobs is still too low. So you can see that. And so we identified that the barriers to this green transition, especially in the Asian country, it's because of the lack of trained, educated professionals. So as a responsible organization who is actively involving in achieving climate-related targets, we are continuously promoting green education since we can't make this transition alone. So that's why we guide professionals to make this transition by improving their green literacy through our educational programs, offering internationally certified, recognized certificate. So this is basically the career pathway as a green professional. So the first step is to complete the first initial program, complete associate professional training program. And then after enlisting, you can complete the advanced training professional training program. Then you have to gain the real experience in a project. And after completing that, you have to gain, not after completing, but throughout this journey, you can gain points by participating in our CPD events, the Continuous Professional Development Programs. And after completing the 60 points in this scheme, you can apply for accreditation. And through a Viva, we are selecting the most important green professionals as green SL accredited professionals. So as I mentioned before, the first step of starting this journey as a green professional is to train under the associate professional training program. And the next program, we are going to start the next program at the end of this week, but you can still register. And we have gained the local recognition in the TVEC registration. And any professional in the construction industry, like architects, engineers, quantity surveyors, like that, if you have a degree certificate or you have completed a diploma, you can enroll to this program. And we are covering vast majority of the area related to sustainability. Of course, with the reputed pool of resource persons in different related areas, like Professor Sarath Kotagam, Professor Ranjit Disanayaka, Professor Sisir Kumarwadu, like that. All the relevant and reputed professionals are conducting this program. And these are only a few captures taken during our programs. And it includes a site visit as well, also a green project. Even if this program is a 4-day program, after completing the education program within those four days, they are able to, they become competent enough to design a green project and involve green concepts. So the second photograph is within the evaluation of a case study. And we are conducting exams to evaluate the competence level. Apart from that, as a CPD events, we are conducting workshops, advanced training, professional training program, short courses. And these are few captures taken during an advanced training program. And these kind of free webinars, green talks, every month we are conducting a green talk. So you can increase your green literacy by participating. And we conduct competitions for maybe undergraduates, for school children. Apart from the education program, we conduct these types of environmental programs: beach cleanups, tree planting, green walks. So at the end of each year, we are celebrating this green movement and recognize green initiatives. Not only that, we are conducting research, especially with the support of the international organizations. This is one of them, the Harita Diriya. We recently conducted and completed. That was for converting the SME industries to green. And this is during the Green Market Development Forum held recently. And we have another network called the Alumni of Certified Green Professionals. And they also conduct different activities so that you can involve in those as well. So after completing after joining, after maybe starting from the Associate Professional Training Program, you will become a green professional. You will start the journey, and you can involve with us to make the awareness, to make general public aware of green concepts. You can work as a green consultant, of course, involved in research activities, then rating tool developments, and independent building evaluators, resource persons for the identified professionals will be taken as resource persons for workshops and seminars, and for developing our educational programs and policy development, and also other volunteering activities. You can participate as a green professional. So with this international recognition, we as Green Building Council of Sri Lanka conduct these types of different events. And I would like to warmly welcome you all to join us to make this green transition, finally, ultimately, to achieve the climate change targets. So that's all regarding Green Building Council of Sri Lanka and our work. Now, I would like to cordially invite Dinashika Karunaratne to introduce today's resource person, to conduct the webinar on sustainable transportation. Over to you, Dinjika.
Thank you very much, Upeksha. I think it was an informative session for our audience. Good evening all. We warmly welcome you all to today's webinar conducted by the Green Building Council of Sri Lanka. Today's topic is very informative, important for all of us. It is sustainable transportation. Sustainable transportation refers to any means of transportation that is green and has low impact on environment and is also about balancing our current and future needs. So this session will be conducted by Dr. H.R.Pasindu. Dr. H.R.Pasindu is a senior lecturer in the Transportation Engineering Division, Department of Civil Engineering at University of Moratuwa. He also serves as the Director, Engineering Research Unit of the university. Prior to joining University of Moratuwa, he worked in Land Transport Authority, Singapore as an Executive Engineer in Asset Management Division. He is also serving as the council member in the Asian Pavement Engineering Society, National Council for Road Safety in Sri Lanka, and the Vice President of the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport Sri Lanka. He obtained his PhD from the National University of Singapore, BSc Engineering Honors in Sri Lanka, in civil engineering from University of Moratuwa. He is a chartered engineer and a chartered member of CILT Sri Lanka. Key research interests are in the areas of highway planning, pavement access management, road safety, and airfield design. He has over 50 publications in internal journals and conference proceedings. He also serving as a reviewer for leading journals in highway engineering such as the International Journal of Pavement Engineering, Journal of Transportation Engineering, Transport Research Record. He has worked as a consultant for ADB, World Bank, JICA, and WHO in projects related to transport infrastructure feasibility studies, economic evaluation of road upgrading, road safety audits, transport sector reviews, national road safety strategic plan development, and traffic studies for major developments. So, I cordially invite Dr. Pasindu to share your valuable knowledge with this great audience. Dear sir, over to you.
Thank you, Dinushika, for the kind introduction. Very pleased to see a strong interest in sustainability and transportation in general. So since we are constrained for time, I will begin my presentation. Right. Okay, so good evening, everyone. Welcome to the lecture on sustainable transportation as part of a series of lectures on the sustainability organized by the Green Building Council of Sri Lanka. So just to give an outline of what we will talk about during this 1 hour session, we look at the defining what is sustainable transportation to get an understanding, come to a common ground as to what is meant by this, what is the exact scope of sustainability with respect to transportation. And then we look at try to understand the context with respect to Sri Lanka. What are the key metrics in the transport sector and how they sort of match up with respect to sustainability. Then we will look at few successful strategies in sustainable transportation that can be elaborated within this given time. Of course, this vast area that has you can discussed over several weeks if you want to understand it to that extent. But of course, within the time period, we will highlight some of the known success stories with respect to implementing sustainable transportation. As a learning outcome, if you attend this, first thing to try to understand the main aspects of sustainable transportation. and then identify sustainable transport strategies for Sri Lanka. So if you can achieve those two learning outcomes, this session would have been a fruitful session to you. So what is sustainable transportation from a global context point of view? Why we are concerned about sustainability in the transportation domain? Because there are three main reasons. The first one, it accounts for about 64% of global oil consumption. This was from World Bank study in 2019. And second, as a result, 27% of all energy use, 23% of world's energy-related carbon dioxide emissions are resulting from transport. So there is a huge scope if we are to achieve, climate change, mitigate climate change impacts, reduce future issues that may arise as a result. Transport has such a big role to play. So not only from the environment point of view, but even if you look at the health point of view, right? The number of deaths attributed to pollution, almost 185,000 per annum. And it's even worse when it comes to road safety. More than 1 million die on the roads each year, and 50 million are injured, right? So that's almost more than double the population of Sri Lanka. So that's an enormous number when you look at the human casualties. And all of these factors, there is another factor that you all have to keep in mind, that is the financial factor, right? So energy, the health impact, the road safety issues, all ultimately lead to a financial problem, because let's say climate change induced natural disasters. But the final result is it's going to damage our infrastructure, and you have to spend more and more money on reconstructing those damaged infrastructure. So there is a huge financial implication when it comes to all these direct impacts. So as a result, the Sustainable Development Goals were introduced by the UN. And when you look at the 12 goals, there is almost all the goals either have a direct or an indirect relationship to transport, right? So even if you look at the second goal, we included like zero hunger. Now you might wonder what does transportation has to do with zero hunger? But having an efficient transport system, reducing the cost of transportation, will help the farmers to transport their produce to the market and be more competitive, and sell their produce at a better rate. Same with health. Directly, road safety has a huge implication. Direct impacts when it comes to goal number 9. We are talking about infrastructure, right? So the sustainable infrastructure development with the Green Building Council also reiterated. Goal number 11 also direct impact sustainable cities and communities. So you look at all these different 12 or 13 SDGs, and you could see each and every one has some level of involvement with respect to transport. And what does sustainable transport means? Actually, the word that is used right now is a little bit beyond sustainable mobility, because we are looking at the entire domain of travel behavior, the need to travel, right? So if you have sustainable mobility, these are the outcomes. Now you might wonder, why do we have to spend so much time and energy and our effort to make our transport system more sustainable? But there are direct impacts of this, and this is what we need to always remember. When you have sustainable mobility, it directly affects your energy security. It's relevant very much to Sri Lanka, because we are struggling with energy security right now. We don't have financial capacity to procure the required fuel quantities. So it affects energy security. It affects the environmental. It impacts environmental protection. It affects the economic development. Without transportation being sustainable, it will not be able to continue facilitating the economic growth of a country. We cannot be spending so much money to fulfill our travel needs and ensure economy will develop. And more than anything, the quality of life in terms of your health, in terms of travel time efficiency, in terms of road safety. And that is something that sustainable transport options will provide. Right? So, beyond the environmental impact, beyond the immediate environmental impact, there's a far-reaching impact on a country if we properly implement sustainable mobility projects. So now we focus on what is the situation in Sri Lanka, because when we are trying to figure out solutions, we must also understand the context. Why we are in this situation, and what are the reasons, what is the underground conditions with respect to the land transport sector in Sri Lanka. Our land transport sector is heavily biased towards road transport. We have more than 110,000 kilometers of roads, one of the highest road densities in the region for a country with similar economic status. As a result, road transport is basically dominating our transport services, right? So when you're talking about sustainability and promoting sustainability, so a lot of focus will naturally be on road transport, because that is already taking up large portion of the transport services. And we have 6.7 million active vehicle fleet, cumulative registration little over 8 million, but actively there's about 6.7 million vehicles operating. And if you notice, in the last decade, there was a huge increase in motor vehicles. For example, between 2015 and 19, more than 1.6 million motorcycles have been added to the fleet. So that's quite a significant rise. So all these have implications on how we are going to tackle sustainable transport projects in the country. So that's why it's important to understand the context. To elaborate more on motorization rates, so you can see where Sri Lanka is. We have quite a high motorization rate. If you look at vehicles per 1,000 inhabitants, if you notice the countries above us, Malaysia, China, Japan, Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, and Korea, all these countries have achieved a significant economic growth consistently over the last decade or so, right? Easily above 5%, 5 to 6% per annum. So we are approaching that, although our economy has been stagnant for a long period of time. So this would indicate some problems, some structural problems with our system, where we have promoted private vehicle usage while the economy has remained stagnant. So it has resulted in putting more pressure on the economy, because our fuel consumption and road safety issues have now come up to become a significant problem. In comparison, we notice our public transport investments have been very slow for a long time. We have a little over 7,000 operational fleet of government-owned buses, close to 19,000 not operational but registered fleet, and rail, this 1,600 kilometers of rail. So these are very insignificant numbers when you compare to infrastructure capacity. When you look at the road network that we have, right? So that therein lies a problem. That is the result, why we have gone for such high motorization rates, even though our economy has remained stagnant, because there is no other alternative for people to fulfill their transport needs. And especially you can notice the growth in 2 and 3 wheelers, right? So we are right here, even above the other countries, but compared to countries like Myanmar and all that, they also have very high growth of motorcycles and 3 wheelers. So what is the repercussion of this? Repercussion of this is, every year we are emitting more and more carbon dioxide to the environment, and that has gradually increased up to about 11 million metric tons by 2021. Of course, with the economic situation and reduction in travel, this may have sort of plateaued to an extent, but this is still not where we should be, right? So now I think Sri Lankan government also have signed up for the COP27 targets, and they are trying to become net zero by 2050. So this transport related emission reduction is a significant component of that, and we have to take measures to reduce it by 50-60%. And just to give context where we stand with respect to our regional peers, it's not too different from rest of Asian countries. If you look at transport emissions per capita combined with the GDP, with respect to in relation to the GDP, or if you look at transport emission, total emissions with respect to the population, we are sort of average. We are not neither good nor bad. We are average. We are on par with the rest of the Asian countries. But we must remember, our economy is still very small, and we need to decide as a country in which direction we are going. Can we afford to go in the direction of Brunei, which is, the nature of the country is such that they will consume a lot of fuel, or do we need to go in the direction of Singapore, which has developed but at the same time kept the emission per capita at a very, very low rate, right? So the policies that we make with respect to sustainable transport will determine over the next decade or so, by 2050, when we reach a developed country status, whether we'll be here or here. So the estimated is about 19 million. That's what I mentioned earlier. And this, the target right now under the government strategy is to reduce it by 50% by 2050. And the other aspect with respect to sustainability, if you remember the first slide we discussed on the global context, is on safety, right? So when we talk about sustainability, like we do mention about the emissions, we have to focus on safety as well, because you cannot have a transport service that ultimately results in high number of injuries or deaths, fatalities to the users. And that is not sustainable. You cannot have people dying on the roads year after year and say our transport service is sustainable, because you cannot continue that. That's the whole essence of sustainability. So if you look at fatalities, this is a distribution of deaths per 100,000 people for all countries. Now, all these countries in the world are there. And when it comes to car users, we are doing fairly well, right? We are almost on par with some of the developed countries in the world. But if you go further, if you look at pedestrians, we are now in the middle region, right? So we are far worse than some of the developed countries, but we are still much better than some of the less developed countries than Sri Lanka, right? So we are in sort of middle range. But if you look at motorcyclists, now we are approaching the high risk category, right? So again, rather than looking at the entire data set of fatalities and comparing, if you break it down, you will be able to get more insights and figure out how do you target, which areas do you target to solve road safety problem in Sri Lanka. And you can clearly see there should be a huge emphasis on motorcycles, because that is still performing very poorly with respect to even global conditions, right? So this is the sort of analysis that will help you to identify the correct type of strategies to make it more sustainable from a road safety point of view. And overall, also we are sort of not bad. We are in the lower half, but there's still room for improvement, right? So you can look at countries in Scandinavian countries, places like Singapore, they have reduced fatalities by a tremendous amount of reduction over the last decade or so. And the other thing about fatalities, we've sort of hovered around 3,000 in the last 5 years. It hasn't really changed too much. There was a small reduction during 2019 and then during COVID period. And it has continued to go down because of the economic crisis related setbacks. So people are traveling less. As a result, there are less accidents. But still, this is not something that we can be happy about and say 3,000 is okay. And this is not sustainable. You can't afford to have 3,000 people dying on the roads each and every year. And countries that have taken sufficient steps, like Netherlands, within a course of 10 years, they have been able to reduce it by almost 50%. So this is not something that you can do overnight. So it takes time. So we have to plan early. and come up with the correct strategies to sort of identify what should be done. More information on this. Just want to highlight. You can see the variation of accidents. It hasn't really changed, nor has it improved. And more importantly, this is what I mentioned about motorcycle crashes. So I just want to emphasize that. You can see this period, 2014 to, these are the registered vehicles. So there's a huge jump in the number of registrations. And then almost immediately after the next year, the motorcycle crashes started increasing, right? So these are just the verified crashes, fatal and grievous and non-grievous. So you could see the correlation. Right? So when you have increased motorization, unless you take stringent measures, you will naturally have more crashes on the road. And then now we focus on identifying strategies, which is understanding the problem is one thing, but you need to also know what to do about it. And best way to figure out strategies rather than generalizing everything is to understand the different categories, different areas these strategies can help. Now, what I thought to explain, how I thought is to frame this was to separate the strategies by objective, right? So some strategies you can have the strategies to targeting reducing energy consumption and emissions. Now, if you take electric vehicles, that strategy completely focus on reducing emissions, right? Especially if your generation is also renewable, completely reduces a lot of energy consumption and emissions. And then you can have sustainable transport strategies focusing on road safety. Then you can talk about sustainable transport strategies focusing on resource usage reduction and financial viability, reduce the cost, because that is also a problem for low middle income countries. We cannot continue to spend money, our capital on infrastructure and transport sector because of other restrictions, fiscal capacity restrictions we have. So if you are to continue our transport services like this for a long time, we need to figure out how this service can be delivered with less and with less money, right? So by objective also you can categorize sustainable transport strategy. So something like coming up with a new management system or a software to make your service delivery more efficient even in a government institution that may reduce the cost by 5% or 10%. That also can be categorized under sustainable transport initiative. It doesn't necessarily have to be like an infrastructure or providing new equipment or new vehicle type. It can be something like a system improvement also, with ultimate result in better resource utilization, can be categorized as sustainable transport initiatives. Then it also helps to categorize sustainable transport strategies by sector. Now, transportation in general, we can group into three aspects in Sri Lanka. We have urban transport problems, right? So those are the problems that happen within a city, right? And then you have regional transport problems. Those are your travel needs between major cities. If you're going from Colombo to Matara or Colombo to Anuradhapura, what are the sort of services you need? And then you have the rural transport needs. That is within the city or within a town or within a local village, how people's transport needs can be fulfilled. So what works for urban transport doesn't necessarily work for rural transport. I'll give you a simple example. We talk about rail expansion, LRTs and all that. It works for urban transport. It doesn't work for rural transport, right? But it may work for regional transport. So you have to understand the context at which these things can be implemented. And we also talk about sustainable transport strategies by the stage of implementation. That means at a planning and development stage, we can do things that are sustainable. At operation stage, now we already have a lot of assets. We already have 100,000 kilometers of roadway. So planning and development part is already done. We have very little to manage with that. We don't have too much room space to change much. but we have a lot of scope in the operations part of it, maintenance part of our road network. So there are so many things under sustainability that we can do in order to maintain our assets in a more efficient manner, right? And then we can also categorize by the type of service, whether we are providing this service for passengers, transport. So what needs for freight transport is completely different to an extent what is necessary by passenger transport. So segregating these strategies by these categories is important. Otherwise, you will not be able to evaluate the impact. That is the key, right? So to evaluate whether these strategies have been effective, you have to segregate them. And then you can check outputs and then outcomes, and then you can see whether it has been successful. Now, I'll give you a small example. We talk about road construction. Typically, road construction will come across as something not sustainable, right? You have to spend a lot of money, spend a lot of resources. It always has some environmental impact. So how can we make a road construction, which is apparently an unsustainable activity, be part of our sustainable transport strategy? So I've given that, I've just taken 2 activities. There are so many things that you can do, but I've just highlighted 2 activities under planning and development. One thing you can do is you can use locally available materials from soil, modified soil. You can use aggregate sources, all these things locally available. You should prioritize. And then design of the road structure. We tend to over design, and if we can reduce the thicknesses and optimize it, we can save a lot of money. So that activity comes under the objective financial viability and resource usage reduction. So it's a directly a sustainable practice. And same way, context sensitive design. That means you understand what is the purpose of this road and design accordingly, so that people will not speed and cause accidents and all that. So that will contribute towards road safety. In same way, under operations, we can look at asset management. How do you manage? Now we have almost 85,000 of rural roads. Now, how do you manage this asset? Do we let it deteriorate, and when it becomes non-motorable, do we spend a lot of more money and rehabilitate it, or do we maintain it regularly so that the cost will be effective? Right. So that is a decision that you can make under operations stage, and that will also contribute towards financial viability and make it more sustainable. And regular road safety inspections to reduce crashes, that will contribute towards making it more safe, the road network more safe for all the road users. So just wanted to highlight how any activity you can identify sustainable approaches within that, and that is the real issue, rather than going for traditional, generic terms, public transport, buses like that. You identify, okay, within your boundaries, you might be working the RD as a highway engineer. Of course, you have very little control over public transport improvement. So within your scope, within your domain, how can you address sustainability and initiate sustainable transport strategies? So that is the takeaway from this this slide base. And this is just, I will not go through one by one. This is a slide I've taken from a study done by World Bank. It's on Path to Zero, Vision for Decarbonized Transport in Asia. So they have the categorization that I gave earlier, but they have sort of simplified it to 2, urban and non-urban, right? So the categorization I gave was more relevant to Sri Lanka because we have urban, rural, as well as regional, which has different characteristics. But here they have focused on passenger and freight and focused on urban and non-urban, right? So for example, within urban area, they might be promoting cycling and pedestrian facilities. But non-urban means regional, basically here, long distance trips. So then, of course, cycling and pedestrians is not a key component for long distance trips. So there are regional rail, those could be a factor. Even air transport for long distance trips, that can be a factor. So you have to look at ways of making those more sustainable. So this is the sort of way you can frame your problem so that you understand it more clearly, right? So, and the other thing is they talk a lot about technology. A lot of people ignore that. ticketing apps, all these things contribute towards making public transport more user-friendly. That will promote more usage, and that will make it your transport system more sustainable. So, right? So always remember, don't just look at the project and disregard that as not being sustainable or not. See how it can be framed and how the outcome can be related to sustainability. Now we will go into specific strategy that that has worked elsewhere. Again, this is not a case. I mean, it's a case of understanding what has worked and implementing. The problem with respect to all these are implementation. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. People have tried this and tested this. There's a lot of evidence on what has worked and what has not worked. So we don't have to spend more time and money discussing these things over workshops and all that. Just identify what has worked elsewhere and figure out how it can be implemented through our various state institutions. So I will just highlight some key strategies that has been productive and how the approaches that have been good, and hopefully you can learn something from that. And first thing, when you understand about sustainability, understand the transport modes and the level of sustainability of those modes. We all know, if you look at transport modes, all car modes are the energy consumption. This talks about life cycle greenhouse gases, right? During manufacturing, fuel and the infrastructure required. Now, for a road, the life cycle greenhouse gases include the greenhouse gases emitted during the car manufacture, during road construction, the material sourcing the materials for road construction, and the operation. So the entire life cycle. So you notice all these cars are very high in terms of greenhouse gas emissions during the life cycle. So there's no argument about that. And then you have the sustainable non-motorized modes like bikes, which are also very environmentally friendly. But if you look at mass transit, the clear winner is a train, right? So especially if you look at the breakdown for train, the main component is fuel. Vehicle component as well as infrastructure component, it's not so much. The main component is fuel. So if you have your power generation, like you go for electric trains, and if your power generation is renewable, there are huge implications for using rail as the most sustainable mode to fulfill your travel needs. So that's why a lot of cities are emphasizing on expanding their rail networks to make it more sustainable. So again, this is other one on sustainable measures. This is also a way of framing your problem. Now, if you, irrespective of whether passengers or goods, these are the different modes you can use. The strategies should be revolving around avoiding, shifting, and improve. Now, ideally, if you can avoid the need to travel, that will be ideal, right? Either work from home or reduce the the distance of traveling by having transit-oriented developments with integrated public transport links and all that. So that is avoiding. And then shifting to more efficient modes. That means from your private vehicle, you shift to a mode that is polluting less. I showed you the figure earlier. All these are, all the non-private modes are less polluting. So if you shift to public transport or bikes or even walk, that will be always more efficient. Now, then you will have people who are now still using private vehicles, right? So those, there can be needs. So you cannot say everyone has to shift to a public transport. There could be specific needs that warrant people to use private vehicles. So you make them as efficient as possible. You improve the vehicle efficiency, you improve the fuel quality, and then you go for, ultimately you go for electrification, provided, again, I reiterate, your power generation in the country has to be renewable. Otherwise, you're just shifting from one source to the other. And then that will make sure even those who are using private vehicles, it will have least impact on the environment, right? So same way you can have your rail network systems electrified, and bus networks, buses operational also electrified. So if you look at the real impact, like 30-40% of the real impact of emission reduction will will come as a result of improvement, because practically you cannot make all travel done via public transport. That's not going to happen. So there will be still people, about 20-30% remaining on private modes. So you have to make them as efficient as possible. And this is another illustration of that: avoid, shift, improve. And to do that, you can take all kinds of measures. Planning measures, that means your land use planning. I will talk about this more in the next slides. Regulatory measures, emission standard that we have in Sri Lanka already. Parking requirements, parking rules, banning parking certain times. Economic instruments like your fuel tax. Now when you increase the fuel prices substantially, you would notice that there will be 10%, 15% reduction in consumption. Minor changes in fuel doesn't really help, but if you do like in Sri Lanka, because of economic crisis, where the prices have more than double, then obviously there will be 10 to 15% reduction in usage. Information instrument, making people aware, giving them options on availability of public transport modes. Those are always beneficial. And the technological instruments, fuel improvements, other tools that you can make transport system more efficient. So there are so many methods, right? There are so many methods that you can implement under these strategies: avoid, shift, and improve, to achieve your goal. Right? So you don't always have to say, we don't have money, we don't have capital investments for these, but they are within your limitations, within your fiscal capacity. You can always identify strategies that can be implemented to make your transport system more sustainable. So a quick slide on this. Basically, we are trying to inverse the triangle. All this time the focus was on the car. We are trying to, especially for urban transport, this is not relevant for regional transport. For urban transport, we are trying to inverse this triangle, make sure majority of the strips are non-motorized, then the bulk is taken up by public transport, and the remaining by cars. Now, for example, we don't have recent data on this, but the 2014 travel survey done under Comtrans, JICA project, estimated about 1.2 million trips in Colombo, Western Province, are less than 2 kilometers a day, 2 kilometers in length. So there's huge potential to keep these trips as pedestrian or non-motorized trips. Right now, what is happening? They are transferring into motorcycles or three-wheelers. Right. So if you keep them, if you have the right infrastructure, you can easily capture these trips and convert them into non-transport. And this is about land use. Due to since we are pressed for time, I will focus on this slide. So if you have a city that has a poor land use strategy or a poor land use plan, it's very, very difficult to solve most of the transport problems, right? Including implementing sustainable transport solutions. So first thing that you have to do is you have to get your long-term land use strategy intact. That means cities have to be densified. There is no other way around it. It might seem too radical, or we are used to certain way of life, having a single-story or two-story houses, quite a large plot of land, typical suburban sort of lifestyle. But that doesn't work. We have to densify the cities. We have to bring high-density residential developments around the key areas, and then we have to link those high-density developments near through mass transit, and that is how it can work. So we are not too late even now, since Colombo still, compared to rest of high-density cities, high population cities, we are still not that high. So we still have room for improvement, at least for future developments. We cannot let land use developed ad hoc manner. We have to have a clear strategy and see what places like Singapore, Bangkok, even a place like Bangkok, how much densification they have achieved. And that is really reducing their transport energy use. That is reducing their fuel consumption. So that is benefiting the economy. right? So look at the major cities in South Korea. So Hong Kong, naturally, because of the land size, you have to be in a concentrated area. But Manila in Philippines, Jakarta, all these cities are quite dense in terms of population density. So Colombo also have to go in that direction. There is no other way around it. And if you go in the other direction where the US cities are, you're talking about high energy usage. Right? So this is the typical suburban lifestyle we are exposed to. We have been growing up seeing this, and we think that that is the one that works. But it really doesn't work for in the long term. It doesn't. It's not efficient. So that's the problem we are facing. Same with parking. So if you have if you let vehicles come into the city, you have to give parking, right? So if you give parking, you have to allocate more space for parking. So that makes the city land use more inefficient. So it's like a vicious cycle. So somewhere down the line, you have to break this cycle and say you have to restrict parking, provided you give alternative for them to arrive to the city. So just want to highlight that one. And rethinking about space for road. Unfortunately, in Colombo, we don't have the luxury of having 6-lane roadways, except for parts of Baseline and parts of Gaul Road. So we are very narrow roads. But if you do have the luxury of this having such a wide carriageway, you can redesign that within the city to allow more throughput. Right, because ultimately we are trying to process number of people per hour. We are not processing vehicles per hour. That is not our goal. So if you have 6 lanes of traffic, you're talking about 12,000 odd people can be processed per hour. But if you repurpose it and then have multiple options, you can process about 30,000 people per hour. Again, I want to highlight the context. Now you can do that within the city limits, right? If you're talking about short distance trips where people can walk from a MRT station 3 kilometers, you can do this. But you can't take this solution and apply to a regional road, let's say a long distance or arterial road, and say we will allocate 1 lane for buses, or we will allocate 1 lane for pedestrians or cyclists. Because long distance trips require, you cannot, this rate is applicable for a short duration. You cannot expect people to walk 3 hours at 30,000 people per hour. It doesn't work. So you have to understand the context within the city limit. Of course, this has tremendous amount of benefits that we must understand. And again, if you have long distance, high demand corridor, you have to go for rail. There is a tried and tested method. It has worked in almost every city in the world. So bulk of your commuter traffic, that means coming from the suburbs to the city, is taken up by the train. Because of this reason, if you are replacing it with buses, you need so much buses, and you don't have this amount of space available on your main corridor entering the city, right? So that is the reason you have to leverage on railway to carry bulk of your urban transport demand. And just to summarize the things that I've discussed so far with respect to urban transport. So number one is land use, right? You have to get your land use planning strategy in place. I believe UDA has come up with some long-term plans for 2013. I think you can at least work around that and see what sort of implication it will have on the transport sector. And then number two, once you get this right, you have to develop transit-oriented city. That means you build your residential and commercial developments around key transport hubs, railway stations, bus terminals, so that people can walk from those stations to your workplace. And then this will attract a lot of people to public transport, and this will reduce the need to travel, right? Especially long distance. And once you do that, now you have road space to optimize, right? You have more space, more breathing space to actually do some improvements on the road network, do the traffic management scheme, provide lanes for bicycles, improve pedestrian facilities, and optimize your road network, right? So you cannot do that without shifting a significant portion of traffic to public transport modes. And then you can encourage walking and cycling, as I mentioned earlier. Implementing transit improvements. Now you have captured that demand, right? You have a ready, public transport user demand. So you can expand the capacity. You can have more buses. You can increase the frequency of rail. You can introduce some new lines. Some loops within the rail network. And once you do all this, now you have given plenty of option to people. Now you can start with the regulation. You can restrict private vehicle in certain time durations. You can say 8 during the morning peak, you cannot enter, parking is prohibited. You can put a toll and discourage people from entering during the peak hours. So, but you cannot go to step 6 now, right? We haven't done any of these, and you can't straight away cordon off Colombo and say you have to pay a toll to enter Colombo in the morning. That doesn't work, right? People will still use it because they don't have other options. And then you can do managed parking. This is very effective because now you have given enough warnings. You prohibit parking because there are options for them. And communicate with all the users. And then finally, you can engage the public, get their feedback and make minor improvements. And also, I forgot to mention, now still there'll be private vehicles using. So what you need to do is you give them the infrastructure, charging stations and all that to convert as many people into electric cars. Okay, so now we'll quickly go through 2 other aspects. We cannot discuss them in detail, but I will just, there are a lot of messages. Okay, I just need to try. Okay, so there are a lot of, other aspects of sustainable transport strategies that I just want to give an example to show that in addition to urban transport and emissions, there are other ways of approaching sustainability. So one thing is road construction and maintenance. So an area that I'm quite familiar with my research background. So as I mentioned earlier, we always look at road construction as an unsustainable, strategy, unsustainable way of solving transport problems. But we have to provide roads. We cannot completely decide that for now we are not going to do anything with the roads. One thing, we already have quite extensive road network, and we have to maintain it in a acceptable level. We can't let it deteriorate and then become unmotorable. We have to maintain it in a acceptable level. So we look at this sustainable road design as a framework, right? So we look at the engineering environment. What is the correct type of road for different terrains, different traffic conditions? You see here, when your traffic is very low, you don't need to provide bituminous, or we call it in layman's term, carpet roads. We can easily maintain the road as a gravel road with regular maintenance. So what we are doing is we are just unnecessarily spending a lot of money carpeting roads that doesn't need to be carpeted. And then we look at locally available resources. It can be material, it can be labor. Now, a lot of contracts for road projects are handed out to large companies because of this asphalting situation. Now, if the roads are unsealed, even local contractors, local labor can be used because it doesn't require sophisticated equipment. So that is sustainability, right? In Africa, all these new roads, they are making it unsealed because they can use locally available resources. And then you look at specifications. Can the contractors innovate and come up with new materials to be used? Are our specifications too rigid? So if your specifications are too rigid, there's no room for innovation. So they will just somehow find the material that is specified in our very old regulations and will use it. So that is not sustainability. So sustainable road design encompasses all these aspects, right? And then when it comes to maintenance, rather than using the ad hoc approaches that we have employed so far, we can use more analytical approaches to with whatever money we have, we can make sure our roads are in a better condition. So just to give an illustration, this was a survey done, or sort of a test given to a group of experienced engineers. we gave them different budget levels, and we gave them a list of roads to be selected for maintenance. And then we compared the result of the action and what is the overall condition of the network after they maintained all the roads based on their subjective decision making and some basic analysis without a formal analytical technique. They utilize the budget, and you can see such a high variation in the network condition, right? So that means with the money they have been able to use, they have not been able to achieve the best possible result. Now the best possible result is over here when you adopt a proper optimization approach. But if you don't adopt such tools, always your decisions will be suboptimal, right? You can see all these decisions are suboptimal, especially if you don't have enough money. So if you have plenty of money to spend, of course your solution will also be optimal because there's no constraint. But if you have constraints like in Sri Lanka, even with the money that you spend, you're not doing the best possible job, right? And that is something that we can manage. And let's say we are spending 100 billion rupees over the next 5 years for road maintenance, we can easily save about 30 billion if you are using proper analytical approaches. So you might think that the significance is not so much, but when you aggregate it across a large network, 80,000 kilometers of road, 120,000 kilometers of national road, and a few hundred kilometers of expressways, the aggregated value can be quite significant, right? So that is what we have to always remember. Finally, on road safety, what we can implement, I will quickly go through. Since my background is on engineering, I will just focus on what we can do with respect to engineering design to improve road safety. We need to constantly monitor our roads. We do something called the road safety inspections and identify where the problems are, analyze the accidents and identify what we call the black spots. And then we can be proactive and then go and rectify any problems that may exist on the road before the accident actually happens. So from a road point of view, for an existing network, that is what we can do. If you're designing a new road, there are other techniques. Your design standards can be adjusted. You can include several safety management measures in the design that will prevent accidents from happening in the future. So I will not take too long for this, because if you are interested on reading this up, we have drafted a strategic plan for National Council of Road Safety with the guidance of WHO back in 2019. So I'll put this link on the chat if you're interested. Detailed plans are available on all these aspects. You can read up and see who's responsible, what are the strategies, what are the outcomes, how do you measure the performance of those strategies in the long term, and what sort of outcome it will have for road safety. So that's quite a comprehensive document that we have drafted back in 2019. Unfortunately, these are not getting implemented. But if you're interested on reading up on this, you can. I invite you to go to that link and download the report. So as an evidence of that, you talk about road safety and say always accidents happen because of people are reckless. It's not always the case. Now, if these are two examples from A9 road, now you can see after the war, gradually when the vehicles are increasing, accidents starts happening on the road, right? So by 2012, there were a lot of accidents happening, right? So there were several black spots with major accidents happening. But after identifying these issues, there were corrections made to the road geometry, especially if you look at a place like this. Alignment changes, visibility problems were rectified, and you can see almost immediately. Now the same people are traveling on this road, you can see a reduction in accidents. So from an engineering point of view, rather than blaming people and everyone else, there are a lot of things that we can do. And this is sustainable transport strategies, right? So this is another example of what can be achieved without very high capital intensive long-term strategies, short-term things that within your scope, you can easily implement. This is another example. Of course, this is the other extreme where you need a lot of capital intensive investment, but improving your road geometry, right? So you can see, compare the top picture and the bottom picture. You can see a significant change in the road quality, and that really affects the safety from a road user's point of view. Right. So I think we can conclude the presentation. Taken up close to 1 hour. So thank you very much. Do we have time for questions, Dinishika, or?
Yes, sir. If you have any
Dinishika,
questions.
do we have time for questions?
Okay, sir.
Take one questions.
If you have
Excuse
any
me.
question, please unmute your mic and ask the question.
So can you share your presentation slides? It is sort of valuable to us.
Sorry.
So can you share your presentation slides? So
Yeah, sure. I can.
Valuable to us. Sort of valuable to us.
Can Dinishika, you got it right. So with the participant.
Okay, sir. Sure, sir. Okay, thank you very much, sir, for taking time from your busy schedule to share in your valuable knowledge. I think it was a very informative session for our audience. Thank you very much, sir, again. And thank you all for being a great audience today. Stay tuned our upcoming events too. Good night. Stay safe, all of you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.